Welcome to the Leadership Lovers Podcast. I'm your host, Will Gladhart, CMO at the Culture Think Tank. At the Culture Think Tank, we empower leaders with metrics that strengthen culture, drive performance, and return. We're here today to learn about the actions leaders have taken to address organizational change. Today, our guest is Stephanie Craig, president of Kith. Thanks for taking time to join us.
Hi, Will. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Let's begin by having you share with our audience a bit about yourself, your background, and your organization.
Well, I think it's probably a little bit easier if I do it a little bit in reverse. Kith is a crisis preparation and reputation management advisory. We work with C-suites of varying size organizations, everything from, a couple million to a 50 billion company, to help them build processes and procedures and teams that can spot and respond to and recover from crisis really fast to protect their greatest asset, which is their reputation. I came to this work, honestly. My mom frequently said that I had survived every kind of natural disaster except a tsunami, and I choose not to check that one off the list. It is something I don't want to experience, but I come from a really kind of strange background. I grew up all over Canada. My dad was one of those Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers, the red jacket and the hat. No horse, though. We didn't have a horse, unfortunately. But it meant that I traveled and lived all over the Canadian Arctic. So I was born in the Arctic, which provided a lot of really interesting skills that I keep with me now. I also come from a long line of people that ran towards actual bullets. As I said, my dad was a police officer. My grandfather was at Normandy. I just tend to run towards the verbal bullets. And I'm also all of this really kind of wild background led me to politics, which is also born out of a real love of people. But I'm probably the only person, and we haven't been able to verify or not verify, that I am the only person to ever have worked in the United States House and Senate and the Canadian House and Senate. So my skills are born out of both natural disaster and political disaster.
That is a interesting combination, and the fact that, as we were chatting before, that you were born basically in the Arctic Circle, which is fascinating too. So in the middle of nowhere. But
Yeah.
So we'll be discussing 3 questions today as a warm up to start our conversation. Could you share why you believe a healthy culture is critical?
Well, it's interesting because given that where we focus on, which is crisis, most folks think that it just happens to you, that one day you wake up and aliens have landed in your courtyard or your CFO has absconded with your pension fund. The aliens, yes. The CFO, no. These things don't just happen.
Right.
And companies with good culture, good communication, great processes, checks and balances don't happen to have these things happen as often. You can't guard against everything, but if you have a very thoughtful leadership team that knows and trusts one another, that doesn't have silos of information, those are really that if you had to ask me to identify the number one factor in a corporate crisis, it would be information siloing. Because there's one job besides a CEO that has a responsibility for protecting your reputation. And by the way, your reputation is about 35% of your value of your organization. Pretty big asset to just leave unprotected. And so communications is really the only other entity that is focused on protecting your reputation, but it's not just their job. And that seems to be the difference between a good corporate structure and a great corporate structure that can see, mitigate, recover from, and get better out of a crisis than those that can't. Who's sitting at your leadership table? Are they talking to one another? Are they sitting down and dedicating time, money, and energy to preparing for crisis? And falsely, people make the distinction that there is a physical crisis and a reputational crisis. If you can't make your widgets for whatever reason, supply chain problem, factory goes down, labor unrest, if you can't make your widgets, that is going to make somebody unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
That is a reputational risk.
Yeah.
And so as for leaders that are really thinking about, okay, how can I elevate what I do? I've got all the good credentials. I want to elevate what I do. And of course, this is a bit self-serving, but investing in crisis preparation is going to go a long way to having you weather the really kind of ugly things that come your way that aren't necessarily weatherable for people that are not prepared.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, well, it's great that you bring that up because, I think we can all either pinpoint a large customer service entity or a financial institution or an agency that was supposed to protect XYZ information and did not. And, trust was broken. Obviously, a crisis ensued. There wasn't a communication pathway. It was all hands on deck, and it many are not handled in a way that reflects the organization or even the people in the culture. So I think you bringing that into the mix with the communication elements is hugely important. So it's been our experience that leaders tend to struggle in three key areas beyond crisis, in the areas of people, process, or profit. In your role, especially as not only a leader, but also working with organizations to help them manage the elements of their next steps, can you identify which one of these areas has represented a cultural challenge for one of your clients or someone that you've worked with?
Well, I'm actually going to kind of throw this on its head. We're going to say the people in our world, it's the people plus the process
Mhm.
equals the profit. I just had the opportunity to speak to the Association of Financial Planning in Nashville. And it was an interesting feedback from our session because people were the attendees who are financial planners, CFOs, those sorts of folks were very surprised at how much a crisis could impact them
Yeah.
and what they
Bottom
and what they
line.
could do about it, right? And so when we actually our formula is quite similar to yours. So the differentiator for good response, crisis management to great crisis response is speed, but not just for speed's sake. It's strategic speed, your ability to get ahead of it, to spot it, that sort of thing. But the formula on the inputting to the strategic speed is clarity plus trust. Clarity, and you kind of touched on this already, well, clarity in your values,
Mhm.
what your corporate values are, clarity in your stakeholders. I think a lot of times leaders focus on their stakeholders being the folks on X/Twitter. When you really take a hard look at who your people are, where they are, who they trust, and how they communicate, they're most likely not there.
Right.
So building trust with those folks, because when you have trust with your stakeholders, you figured out who they are, you figured out how to communicate with them. When you have trust with them, when something goes wrong, they give you the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
If they know who you are as an organization, they will give you the benefit of the doubt. And that is when you talk about impacting profit, that helps you get back on track so fast because you're not having to rebuild that trust because they trusted you when you said it happened because of this.
Yeah, I think that's a great tie-in of those three elements. But touching back to that people or process kind of, what did one of those challenges look like, and how did it negatively impact an organization that your team work with?
Well, actually, I will say I'm going to give away the ending. It didn't negatively impact them because so we work with a large government contractor. They have a number of veteran employees, and they just happened to have a payroll that was supposed to run on the Friday before Veterans Day. And their payroll provider came to them on Thursday evening, very late, and said, "We're not going to be able to deliver your payroll until next Wednesday."
Wow.
And so not only were they not going to be able to pay their people, and take into consideration when this happened, right? This happened the first third of the month. So most of them have already paid their mortgages or paid their rent.
Right.
So coffers are a little low. And then their employer is going to say, well, we can't pay you. But what we did with these folks is they knew their values. They knew their values, and that no matter what, their people were going to get paid if they needed it to make it through to the actual pay period.
Yeah.
So that wasn't even a question. They'd done the work. They knew that that was the goal. And so figuring out what we had to figure out was how to message to these folks that it had happened, message to them that there was help, and then orchestrate the help.
Yeah. That's
So
that's huge. I mean, what a What a scary crisis for a company, for one, but also two, there's a whole nother layer wrapped in when you're talking government, veteran, ex-military, etc. So obviously that was you kind of wrapped in both the challenge and the positive outcome as well. So you kind of knocked out two questions at once,
Well,
which I love.
well, one thing I just wanted to add to it is they communicated, they were open, they were honest, and they communicated. They offered help to their employees. They said, if anyone needs the help, here's a phone number and we'll figure out how to get you help through the weekend. Of
Wow.
their 2,000 employees that were affected, 12 called and they were helped. And then about 2 months after the event, there was an employee survey. Loyalty to the company and trust of their leadership went up 10 points.
Wow. You even have metrics to show that there was a huge shift in a movement, even though this could have been a huge reputational crisis, not only internally, but externally for this organization.
And here's the thing, because they did everything right, it never made a peep. It didn't show up
Yeah.
on a Facebook post because they'd done all of the pre-work to make sure that it was all executed. And as they were executing the response, they were figuring their way out. That is what really good leadership looks like and what really bad days can turn out. On the flip side, we had worked with a client that had a very, very public industrial accident, and that you can't prepare for that. You can have all of your procedures and all your processes, and they all worked. We'd worked with them before, but it happened. It was very, very public, and it became very litigious, as most of these things do. So then that becomes working with legal teams, which is a huge part of what we do, which is why I want to go back to something I said at the first, which is that communications.
Mhm.
We had just wrote a column about Disney and Disney I don't know if you recall seeing this, Will, they had had a patron who his wife had gone to one of their allergy friendly restaurants,
Mhm.
and and died from an allergic reaction.
Uh,
And so he sued Disney. And I would guess, this is just a guess, a total hypothesis on my part. The legal team did not communicate with the communications team because the legal team went into negotiations with this man and tried to tell him he had to go to arbitration because he had signed up for Disney Plus and it was in the fine print.
oh, yikes.
And so, of course, this man who's grief stricken has a very heart pulling story, goes public with it. And all of a sudden it becomes a PR disaster because the communications folks didn't know what the legal folks were doing.
Yeah.
Could have been completely bypassed if someone had said, you know what, that doesn't seem like a really good idea.
Right.
Like, let's figure out a different way. And so those are the types of examples that we like to give. First example, they did everything right. They knew their guiding values. Everyone talked. They knew their processes. They knew their procedures. Their people knew who they needed to call and what they needed to do. They ended up really having it turn into a positive. On the flip side, those silos were there. They were not talking. Yeah. And it resulted in a reputational damage at a time when honestly, Disney's had a bit of a rough road, and it's kind of one more tick to
right. One more checkbox to the reputational hit. So,
absolutely.
So as we wrap up today, is there anything else you'd like to add or share with fellow leaders?
I think that here's two things, because I know that your audience is both corporate leaders as well as some private equity folks. For corporate leaders, there's a difference between good and great leadership, and that is making crisis preparation a must-have and not a nice-to-have. I would also add corporate boards. There's so much research around corporate boards putting a lot more emphasis on good crisis planning. So your board could be very interested. And if you're thinking about getting into a company in private equity, if their reputation is part of their value, make sure they've done everything to protect it. And if you're going into one that doesn't have a great reputation and you think you want to keep it, you think you want to try and build that up, put in the proper protections. It's easy. It's just some thoughtful structuring.
Yeah. Well, Stephanie, I've enjoyed having you on our Leadership Lovers podcast. Thank you for your insights.
Thanks so much. We'll really appreciate having me.
Thank you for joining us on the Leadership Lovers podcast. Find all our Leadership Lovers episodes on the Culture Think Tank website at www.theculturethinktank.com, or listen on your favorite streaming platform. We'd love to hear from you about the challenges you have faced as a leader. Tune in weekly as we invite leaders to share their experiences in strengthening culture and performance, one action at a time.